Is it a sin to despair? Well, I guess if it is, then I sin all the time. There are many things that have happened to me in life that have caused me to be discouraged and to despair. But I think of Paul's words in 2 Corinthians 4, verse 8. He says, we are hard pressed, but we're not crushed. We're perplexed, but we are not in despair. And I think Paul is writing from the vantage point of being a minister of the gospel of Christ. There's all these things that are coming at him, all of the bad things that are happening to him because of his stand for the Lord. But even though he was hurt, he was not completely knocked out. He was able to get up and to keep on fighting, to keep on running. He finished the race. I think there's evidences in his life where there were some very, very dark times, as there is in every believer's life. But Paul had a view of God, and he had a view of the sovereignty of God that sustained him and helped him to see that when the dark times come, when those discouragements and depressions come, there is an eternal purpose behind all of them, and that God is working out that purpose in each of our lives. So if we have that perspective on things, it enables us not to stay in a state of despair for a very long period of time. There are things that happen to us in life, illnesses, accidents, things that are completely beyond our control. And when they happen, they wind us, and it's often difficult to get up on our feet. Then there are those things that we face in ministry, the discouragements that come. We have no control over who comes to Christ and who doesn't. We labor, we seek to persuade men because we know the fear of the Lord. But ultimately, it's only God who can open the eyes of the blind. It's only God who can raise the dead to eternal life. We can't do the work of the regenerating power of the Spirit in people's lives. That's the work of the Spirit. But quite often in ministry, it's, you go for long periods of time where you don't see any fruit. And whether it's things that are happening to you, like illnesses or accidents that you have no control over, or just the nitty-gritty grind of ministry and not seeing the fruit come, it's easy to slip into a state where you just wonder, what am I doing this for? But again, if we think of Paul's words in 1 Corinthians 3, he says one waters, one plants, the other waters, but God makes it grow. And whether it's the one who plants or the one who waters, we can do all of this labor, but it is only God who makes it grow. God is the one who brings the fruit. And so I think if we look at the discouragements in ministry from that angle, then we trust in the sovereignty of the living God, that God ultimately will reward us, whether we see the fruit of our labor or not. I think that will help to sustain us in the midst of discouraging moments in the Lord's work. When it comes to things like accidents and illnesses and bad things that happen to us, I think of the life of Joseph. Joseph wasn't praying about the will of God for his life when all of a sudden he got sold by his brothers into slavery. It just happened. But God was in charge of it. And then he ends up in Egypt, but we all know the story. In the end, he was able to say, you meant it to me for evil, but God meant it to me for good. And if we take that kind of a perspective then on all the things that happen to us in life, that God is ultimately in control of all of them, then that will strengthen our faith. So when those dark times come, we know that God is working out his purpose in our life. I think of one of the Psalms where David says, why are you downcast, O my soul? He's talking to himself. He's talking to his soul. And then he says, hope in God. So David asks himself the question, why am I in such a despairing mood? But then he answers it himself. I must hope in God. And I think if we put our hope and trust ultimately in God, he will deliver us from despair.